Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's program. I'm Doniel Drandoff, licensed marriage and family therapist, clinical director of My Extended Family, and I'll be moderating tonight's program. Look forward to what I'm sure is going to be very enriching and valuable content and information. Before getting to it, I want to first recognize and thank the various organizations that are participating tonight that have partnered together to make this event possible. Starting with the UJA, thank you so much for your part in sponsoring this, always very much appreciated. Next, really big thank you and Yasher Koyach to Ohel. I can say it's well known, Ohel is already a household name in the Jewish world. Very few people have not heard the name Ohel. They're known for their amazing passion, compassion when it comes to addressing all the needs of Klal Yisrael, and in particular, I think in the realm of mental health. And as a representative of my extended family, I just want to say to the people at Ohel, Dr. Blumenthal, Rabbi Liebtag, and everyone else who I've spoken with, a big thank you. It's been such a pleasure and a seamless effort putting this together. And now coming to my extended family. So I've personally been with my extended family for about 8 years now. I'd say that when this organization started with a few kids in Rabbi and Rebbetzin Vigler's backyard, nobody imagined it would be what it is today, which is an unbelievably amazing and compassionate organization helping children from single parent homes, where today we have almost 500 children we're servicing in 5 different communities, 5 towns: Far Rockaway, Flatbush, Muncie, Crown Heights, and Teaneck. And it's really a place that was founded upon a principle that has really become a motto of ours, that parents are heroes and single parents are superheroes. And we recognize the tremendous challenges that face you all. And our mission is to support you and to partner with you. And the name My Extended Family, as cliche as it might sound, is a name that I can tell you our staff works tirelessly every day to try and live up to. That to be an extended family for the families that we service and we try to help. So from my extended family, I hope that tonight's program, you find it to be helpful and informative. If you are interested in learning more about my extended family, or you want to register your child, you can visit our website, www.myef.org, or you can email family@myef.org. I'm going to post both of those in the chat, so you'll be able to see it there. So this brings us to tonight's topic, parenting through conflict. We're going to start tonight's program with a conversation with Dr. Norman Blumenthal. I would say that much like Ohel itself, Dr. Blumenthal really needs no introduction. He's also likewise a household name at this point. He's well known for his decades of experience and work on behalf of Klal Yisrael. And he is the director of Ohel Miriam Center for Trauma, Bereavement, and Crisis Response, as well as the Zachter Family Chair in Trauma and Crisis Counseling at Ohel. We're truly fortunate to have Dr. Blumenthal here tonight to share some of his wisdom, which is what we're going to start with in a moment. And following that, there will be approximately a 30-minute Q&A where you will have the opportunity to post your questions in the chat. So everyone should be able to see there on the bottom, the Q&A chat bar there. You can click on there and post your questions. And when we get to that segment, and you can post them at any time while Dr. Blumenthal and I are speaking. And when we get to the Q&A segment, I'll do my best to field as many questions as I can. So without further ado, Dr. Blumenthal. Dr. Blumenthal, I think you're muted. I don't know if everyone else can hear you. I can't. Still not able to hear you, Doc. Technical difficulties. Rabbi Liebtag, if you are there and you can message if you're able to hear, I can't hear.
How about now?
Yes, now I hear you.
Okay, so I think there's something wrong with my microphone, and the second time that happened today. So I apologize. I'm going to just try one more thing quickly.
Now is my microphone working?
It's working. The sound is a little bit different, but it's working.
Okay, no, so for some reason that also happened earlier today. Okay, I apologize. So let's start all over again. First of all, thank Rabbi Drandoff for the gracious introduction. I often like to quote the rabbi of the community I grew up in, who, when I see my cameras doing some strange things. Is that possible? Is that me or is that everybody?
I'm seeing a little glitchy, but you're coming
okay.
through clear. So
Okay, maybe I have to. Okay. The rabbi of my community where I grew up used to begin his sermon with, before I speak, I want to say something. So I'd like to just spend a few minutes before we start our conversations saying something. First of all, I also want to thank Ohel for the opportunity. Our CEO, David Mendel, our Presidium of Mel Zachter, and Jay Kestenbaum, that who make this possible. Again, Ohel is well known. It's in existence for 52 years. Probably its original flagship program is its foster care program for the Jewish community, but also has, I believe, somewhere around 85 residents for people with various types of disabilities. There's a program for geriatric care for early childhood. There's the Tikva clinics. It's too many to mention, and the trauma team, which is what I represent, which is a team of a collection of trained mental health professionals that do trauma interventions all around the country. We were in Pittsburgh after the shooting, Malibu after the fires, Jersey City after the shooting, most recently in Surfside after the building collapse, and also working with schools to do what we call trauma-sensitive schools and work with schools and teachers. So it's a great privilege to be part of OHEL. And I also want to mention that it was really one of the treats has been now partnering with Rabbi Drandoff and with my extended family. I was not familiar with the organization, I have to confess, and I'm sorry I wasn't. And I do urge you to visit the website. You really give you a flavor of the great work that they're doing in helping the Jewish community. There's no proprietorship. We willingly and openly, and I can speak for OHEL, the more we share and the more we collaborate, the better off all of us are. I wanted to say some brief introduction about this topic. And maybe help set the tone. This is a difficult but necessary topic. And I want to begin by saying something that I think shouldn't have to be said, but say it anyway, okay? I remember reading an article once, and a woman was writing that when she was filling out a form, when they came to marital status, they had three choices: married, single, or divorce. And she asked, why is divorce an option? She said, I'm divorced, now I'm single. Why is divorce? And for that matter, if it's important to know that someone was previously married and not married anymore, then why isn't widowed one of the choices as well? And I think it reflects a bias about people who are divorced, and the importance of, making it clear that there should be absolutely no shame in getting divorced. It happens. It's necessary. From a Jewish perspective, the Torah made it very clear that we have, in fact, when a man gives a wife a get, it's a mitzvah. They're fulfilling a mitzvah. It's something that, now I'm not saying we should do it. Everybody should do it, but if it's necessary, the Torah recognized that there are some marriages that were not meant to sustain or to be forever and ever, or that some couples are not meant to stay together, even if they have to co-parent. So there is, so I want to really make that very clear. And in that spirit, I want to mention that I myself was divorced and I'm remarried, and I have no shame about that. I feel saddened by it, and I'm saddened by its impact on everybody else. But I think it's something that has to be recognized as that happens, as necessary, and nobody should feel any less of a person or any less as a parent. Because they're divorced. I know that some single parents have told me that they're hesitant to call schools about some legitimate concerns they may have about their children, because they're afraid right away it's going to be chalked up to their divorce. Couples are married, have children who have difficulties. Divorced parents have children with difficulties, and sometimes has nothing to do with the marital status of the parents. And parenting is hard enough when the couple is married, and it's very hard to co-parent when you're apart. Some are fortunate and have there's a sort of understanding, and they can coordinate together in an effective way, even though they're not married. But we have to assume, it's a safe assumption that you're not able to get along with one another, or otherwise you would have stayed married. and that there was a rupture in your relationship, and there may be residual feelings, and that complicates it all the more. So I want us to enter into this conversation with a recognition that there is no shame. It's a challenge. It's not something to be embarrassed about. And also that those of us who have raised children while not in a marriage, in a divorce situation, should not only not be stigmatized, but should be complimented and get the necessary recognition for accomplishing a job that is Herculean for married couples and doubly hard for those who are divorced. With that in mind, and that's my introductory remarks, I'm going to hand it back to Rabbi Drandoff, who's going to sort of coordinate this discussion.
Yeah, and I really appreciate your words, and it resonates a lot with me, and sort of the messages that I hear from a lot of the single parents that I've spoken with, the shame that's really unfounded, or at least should be unfounded, like you said, and as I was saying before about what's become a motto for us, parents being heroes and single parents being superheroes. It's really beyond accurate. It really is. When you understand the struggles and the challenges doing it alone, it is Herculean, like you said. So that, I guess, brings us around to like opening the conversation.
Sure.
Because at the end of the day, they are superheroes, and they also, single parents often have very, very real struggles and challenges in particular, and is the theme of tonight's conversation. When a single parent is dealing with an ex-spouse who is to some degree, let's say, difficult, challenging, either putting up roadblocks, making it difficult, whether it's emotionally or be it on practical things, day-to-day stuff, making it difficult to do the job as a parent. And I guess I imagine that for a lot of our participants tonight, that idea resonates, that they probably, a lot of our participants feel that that's what they're dealing with to some degree on that spectrum of difficulty as a result of their ex-spouse. So I'm wondering if you can help give some general guidelines and tips and tools and insight for our parents who are curious to hear about that a little more.
Okay, so I'm going to, obviously what I know from working with the parents and from my own personal experience, but even all the more so, like the famous Rabbi Hanina, who said he learned the most from his students, anything I know in any area that I speak about, that my greatest debt of gratitude, it's to those who gave what is a mental health professional's greatest gift, which is the trust. Trust me with your most personal and potentially taxing matters. And of course, what's more important to us than our children. And I think that's what I alluded to before. You're working together with someone who you couldn't work together with. So it's almost like there's a built-in paradox in co-parenting in a divorce situation. I remember sometimes people will say to me, well, why can't divorced couples just get it together and do things together and sit next to each other and have meals together? And if they could get along that well, then why did they get divorced? That's even more confusing. The challenge is, it's really sort of dancing at two weddings. The challenge is to be cognizant of the fact that there is a rift, and sometimes a lingering rift, or to be cognizant of the fact that for whatever reason it was not possible for you and your ex to be coordinated and to work together, and yet you still have to. And how do you do that? And then sometimes, as I think you alluded to, Rabbi, the very reason for the rift is still present and might be an impediment to effective parenting. And how do you negotiate this built-in paradox, this built-in contradiction of coordinating with someone for whom it was literally impossible to coordinate? And by the way, more so in the Orthodox Jewish community than in the secular community. It's an interesting thing. I once met a judge from Nassau County Supreme Court. He was actually a gathering of psychologists. His wife was a psychologist, an Italian-American who was a judge in Nassau County Supreme Court. And he saw I was wearing a yarmulke, and he said to me, "Oh, the Orthodox divorces, they're the worst. They're the worst." And, at first I was a little taken aback, it's a Chol Hashem or whatever. But then I tried to explain to him that, we very much value marriage, and we very much value the family. For us to get divorced, it's got to be pretty bad. And there are many situations where perhaps someone I'm guessing, from a non-Orthodox community will say, it's not great why don't we get divorced? Whereas we would either work very hard to make it work or even tolerate certain complications in a marriage that others wouldn't. So if it gets to that point, it's pretty bad. And sometimes we let it linger too long, only because we're so invested in attempting to try to make it work. So it festers and it gets to really a bad place. So, and ironically, what he said, which sounds insulting, is really speaks to how much of a premium we put on the family. But using this sort of aerial view, and then maybe we'll get more specific as we speak, how do you parent with someone whom you may not approve of, you have a hard time getting along with, who may have certain tendencies and behaviors that you don't want imparted to your child, and on the other hand, not embroiling the child in any kind of conflict, not reigniting conflict, which, as I'm sure everybody knows, nobody benefits from. I'm not done.
Yeah, no, I actually think it's really fascinating, that insight about what we all know, that it does seem that way, that divorces in the frum world, in the Jewish world, are seemingly a lot more contentious and painful. And that's sort of a really nice reframe on it, to understand that dynamic, that phenomenon, that we put so much more. There's such a great investment, and sometimes, like you said, marriages go on maybe longer than they should even. And then once it gets to that breaking point, it's overwhelming. So I guess what I would want to understand a little better is when a single parent is working so hard, and again, we're talking in generalities right now, and there are some questions that I have that already came in advance that we're going to get to soon. But how specifically or practically can a single parent navigate those challenges when there are roadblocks actively being put up by an ex? Sometimes it could be that the ex-spouse is just so angry that they're going to do anything they can to sabotage. Doesn't matter what it is. Sometimes there's real differences of opinion, and it's not a sabotage, even if it may feel like that for one or both.
Sure.
But
in fact,
to navigate that.
So I'll take it even a step further. It's an interesting phenomenon that I and others have observed, is that sometimes post-divorce, people make other radical changes in their lives. What's very relevant to us, and I can see even from some of the questions that are coming in, is sometimes radical religious changes that post-divorce, and either becoming significantly less religious or significantly more religious, or let's say a different type. They'll go from modern Orthodox to being Hasidic or something like that. The reason for that is that there's twofold. One is, I sometimes give a metaphor. Imagine you bought a house, and of course, like every first-time home buyer, you stretch yourself to the limit. You're leveraged up to eyeballs. You've taken all your wedding money as a down payment, and you really can just about afford the four walls, but not much to do much. And you really don't particularly care for the decor of the house, but you live with it because that's what you can afford. And you're living there, and then there's a flood, and you have to replace things anyway. So then you're going to redo the whole house, because already you have to replace it. And that sometimes happens post-divorce. You may not be totally happy with the lifestyle that you have, the religious affiliation, the community, or your career or something of that sort, but just to keep things afloat, you'll manage it. And then now, when your whole world has been uprooted, so you'll uproot the other things also you're not happy with. A classic example I've seen is, let's say somebody marries a person who's not particularly religious, or maybe not religious at all, and somehow meets a potential spouse at the workplace who's Orthodox. It's okay, I'll go along with it because I want to marry you. But now that the marriage collapsed, what do I need this religion for? So you'll see these kind of radical changes. The other thing is also that divorce is painful. It's not something people enjoy on the hierarchy in research in terms of stressful events. So, divorce is way up there. And so sometimes people want to totally dissociate from their past. So they really make radical changes. So you can really have situations where they become the homes become radically different. I think in using the broad strokes that you're asking me to, I think there's a few basic principles. First of all costs, try to avoid further conflict. The research shows pretty convincingly couples who get divorced who can avoid further conflict, and it's a lot easier said than done, the children are okay. Most of the children who, the research, again, maybe it's important to mention it, the research does show that 3 out of 4 children from divorced homes function well. So it's not an immediate recipe. That's one of the biases you're going to hear. Oh, a divorced kid, the kid must have problems. Not necessarily the case. 3 out of 4 do well. That 1 out of 4, now that's good news, bad news, because a higher percentage of children from intact homes are functioning well. I think it's 87%. But the ones who don't, for the most part, we see there are really 2 primary reasons why they don't. One is because if the conflict continues, and especially if which is a topic I don't have time to get into, but if parental alienation, real classic parental alienation takes place, those kids are very damaged. And or if sometimes the marriage had to be dissolved because there's a mental illness in one or both of the partners, and sometimes that mental illness is transmitted genetically to the child, so that child's not functioning not because of the divorce, but because of the mental illness that was behind the divorce. So most do okay. But how do you? So again, let's get back to that question: How do you parent with someone with whom there is conflict or tension?
I just want to also step in for a second and highlight something that you said that I think is so fascinating, and that is when you look at the data that you're bringing forth now, it really turns out that what's common to all children who are struggling, be they from single-parent homes or intact homes, is strife and an anxious home, a conflict-ridden home. So it's an interesting consideration when you think about it, that it's not necessarily the fact that that this child is a single parent child, but oftentimes it's really more to do with the conflict that's still carrying on, and that could happen in an intact home just the same. We all know that.
And there is data to show that kids who go from conflict-ridden homes to peaceful homes, even if it's 2 separate homes, post-divorce, do better. Mm-hmm. So it is the ongoing conflict. There's no question about it. Now, what do you do though? You're not pleased with what's happening with your ex-spouse, and how do you negotiate that when you want to avoid conflict? And you certainly want to avoid embroiling the child or turning what might be a legitimate parental concern into now a further conflict between you and your ex. So there's a lot of ways to do that. First of all, you try to resolve it without embroiling the child. Now, probably the easiest and Pollyannish way to look is, well, I just call it up and call the other person up and work it out. So you can't do that sometimes, and sometimes the status quo or the equanimity is dependent upon not talking to each other. Again, there has to be recognition. You're not getting along. You can't just talk. So sometimes it's good to, if it's really a significant concern, is to try to introduce a third party, an objective third party to help negotiate that. Someone for whom there's trust on both sides, whether it's a therapist, whether it's the school, whether it's the rabbi, but somebody else who can bring to light these issues. The other thing that's very important, and I think this could prevent a lot of difficulties, is, there's a classic story. It's alien business, but it applies here as well. The story is told about the stipler. Someone once came to the stipler to complain that he has a business, and across the street another guy's the same business. I make 10,000, he's making 20,000. The stipler said, "Don't worry, it'll get better." So he came back a few months later. He said, "Yeah, it is better. I'm making 20, but he's making 50." I said, "Don't worry, it'll get better." So he comes back and says, "Okay, I'm making 50. He's making 150. Why is he making so much more money than I am?" The stipler said, "Because he's running one business, you're running 2 businesses. You're running yours and his." Stick to your home. You should be busy with your home, and your ex is busy with his home. And the 2 homes don't have to be identical. Children are capable of sort of compartmentalizing. Children are capable of having 2 different sort of sets of rules or expectations, etc. If they're not contradicting, outright contradictions, but they can live in 2 worlds. And we can also, we call it compartmentalizing. And don't get busy with what's going on in the other person's home, if at all possible, if you can do that. That's point number 1. Point number 2 is that I already mentioned. That's point number 2. Point number 1 is try not to embroil the children. The other point is, and this is going to be very important and very hard. There's nothing more important than our children, but very hard is pick your battles. I often tell a story that a number of years ago I was in Israel and I was invited to view a certain program, a rehab. And it happened to be at the same time that I came for this tour of this rehab. There was the highest ranking Dati general, a religious general in the Israeli army, like I think a 3-star general, who was also invited. And I found him much more interesting than the program, because that's the conversation with him I remember. I don't remember the program really. But he told me a number of interesting things. But I remember one thing he said to me was that we think of generals as people who conquer great lands and win big battles. He said a good general also knows when to raise the white flag and when to retreat. And that's part of skill. You don't get a lot of glamour, you don't get a lot of medals for retreating, but retreating sometimes is the right thing to do. And sometimes that's what painfully what a divorced or single parent has to do, which is to say the cost of winning this battle, and I don't mean just money, although money is a consideration as well, but the cost to me, to my children, is, it's a law of diminishing returns, will be greater than any gain I get by quote unquote winning. So sometimes it's really a matter of knowing when you have to endure, tolerate, and put up with things rather than winning the battle.
As you're talking, you're reminding me of the well-known Serenity Prayer. I do a lot of work with addicts, and
Right.
it's reminding me a lot of that. And there's such wisdom in that, idea, that notion that there are some things that we can change and there are some things that we can't. And the greatest wisdom is knowing the difference, and then having the ability to go ahead and act upon those things that we can change, and to really take that step back, like you're talking about, and wave that white flag when we really can't. Like, to be able to know when we're just not going to get anywhere is very, very important. So I guess, as we're coming on to the 9 o'clock hour, and I see a lot of questions are popping up here, and maybe it's worthwhile just to jump right in. Sure. And get started on some personal, or more specific questions, get a little more granular. And I know that as we talk about individuals' questions, the ideas that come out will probably relate to many, many people. So the first thing I'm noticing as I open up the questions here, that a lot of them relate to the overall issue of when one, and you touched upon it, Doctor, before, the overall issue of when one spouse goes in a different direction, spiritually, halachically, however you want to refer to it, in Yiddishkeit, goes in a very, very different direction. Maybe I'll pick one to just bring the question out.
Okay.
Any tips on how to navigate a situation where one ex goes off completely, both with interactions with them and more so what to not say to the children? What to, I think she means, or he means, what to and not to say to the children.
Okay. So let me, I get this all the time. So let me address that. And again, it's not uncommon, because once their whole world is exploded or imploded, then sometimes, by the way, that's the reason for the divorce, is that we've had situations like that as well, where one of the partners says, I don't want to keep this religion. I don't want to do this religion anymore. Or might be someone who decides that he may have a different sexual orientation and suddenly wants to have a different kind of marriage setup that doesn't fit within the framework of the Orthodox frame. These are the kind of situations that
and that's one of the questions that we received.
Okay, I'm not surprised at all. So again, you can't create a conflict over them. That is very hard, because what's more important to us. So what I sometimes suggest to parents, let's say in a case like this, where one parent has gone off the derech, it's completely irreligious, instead of being condemning, because don't forget, you criticize the child's parent, you're criticizing half the kid's DNA, you're criticizing who this child is to some extent, but rather to express sadness over it. Isn't it a pity that daddy or mommy gave up something so beautiful? I feel bad for them. I'm sorry for them. There's some, I'm sorry for them because they're going to burn, but I'm sorry for them because they don't have a Shabbos, and they don't have a Yom Tov, and they don't have the beauty that we have. It pains me that they're missing out on that. So you're explaining and you're conveying the importance of the religious observance. You're addressing the differences, but at the same time, you're not doing it in a condemning way. In fact, if in some respects, you're doing it actually in sort of a concerned and loving way, and that can get the message across. And of course, the obvious concern also, and this is one of the big problems, when we get both sides. We get the parent who becomes radically, as I mentioned earlier, more stringent and then radical, or giving it up altogether. One of the problems with younger children is that suddenly the non-religious person's home is a whole lot more fun. There's TV, there's Netflix, you can go into any restaurant you want. You're not confined to keeping kosher. You can dress any way you want. There's less restrictions, demands. You can go to public school and not have to have all these Hebrew studies. So there is that temptation to have the more fun. And what especially when dealing with younger children, what 7-8-year-old wouldn't want that. So that's part of the challenge as well. And again, you can't be condemning, and you can't say that's terrible what he's doing. And so one of the things I try to tell parents, and sometimes I use a metaphor, which I'll use in a second, is you have to work triply hard to make your home such a beautiful home, such a home imbued with spirituality and that very special connection with Hashem, so it can counterbalance that competition. Actually, the metaphor I give sometimes to people is, imagine yourself a Chabad shliach in Mooshaugen, Idaho, as many of them are, God bless them. And there's maybe 2 other Shomer Shabbos families, and your kid is not surrounded by the atmosphere that you want to engender, but that's your mission. My understanding is what a lot of them do is exactly that, which is to try to make that home, as beautiful and fun-loving and full of music and spirituality, to counter the temptations that are out there. But again, the other thing is, and this applies, and I mentioned it earlier, and I'll say it again. This applies whatever the religious differences are. This is what we do in our home. What goes on in mommy's home or daddy's home is up to them. I'm not busy with what goes on there. They shouldn't be busy here. And keep the two apart. And again, to the extent that you want to make sure your child follows in the direction that you've established, try to make it very irresistible.
It's a beautiful approach, and really there's 2 sides of it. What it sounds like you're saying is that on the one hand, you maintain your boundaries and not forego on your boundaries, but at the same time not to feel concerned that that's in some way a poor reflection on you, that you're going to drive your kids away. If anything, you'll only drive them away by making a big issue of it and focusing too much on the other home. Focus on making your home as beautiful as you can, and as beautiful, like you were saying, Shabbos should be a beautiful experience. I remember once years ago, Rabbi Vigler, who is the founder of my extended family, he once told the staff, he said something along the lines of, kids need to have such a beautiful experience of Yiddishkeit at home that they would be crazy to want to leave.
Right.
And I thought that was a really fantastic way of thinking about it. And it applies in all families, and certainly single parent homes, when there's, like you're saying, such a pull on the other side. And I think also what you're bringing up is a fascinating insight as well, that sometimes that other side that's irreligious can have some of the trappings that kids would be attracted to. And I think that doesn't only, that general issue also applies outside of the context of religion, spiritual stuff, right? Sometimes I often hear from single parents, and I'm sorry, I'm not directly speaking to any of the questions here per se, but I think it's really important that I hear all the time is the parent with primary custody will tell me, I work so hard to keep my kids on schedule, and I'm the general. Go back, right? I'm the army general. I'm the bad guy. And then they go to the ex and they're having a great time. They're getting Xbox, they're getting vacations, and what am I, right? So how would you speak to that issue, that turmoil?
Okay. So first of all, it's an interesting phenomenon. Let's be blunt. Most of the non-custodial parents are fathers. Now there's a growing trend to do equal custodial arrangements, which is an interesting development. And I can talk about it in a minute what I think about that. But let's say it is a situation where there's that imbalance, where there's the mother, and I think the statistics I last heard is 86% of the time gets physical custody and the father gets visitation. So sometimes the father feels so cheated from having less time with the kids that they feel they got to make it up to them, and make those times they're with them just this fun-filled day with no obligations, no homework, no studying, and just like, they'll have ice cream for breakfast, cotton candy for lunch, and I don't know, whatever, hot donuts for supper, and they go to amusement parks and ball games. And sometimes I'll sit down with these fathers and say, let's do a little calculations, okay? Let's figure out how much time you spent with your child when you were married and how much time you're spending with your child now. And I don't have to tell you, you come home from work at 6, 7 o'clock, you wolf down supper, you go to the Daf Yomi, you barely see your kids. Now, suddenly you have this whole day with them. In fact, I often say that I think visitation is a wonderful idea. I think we should require it for married couples too, that every other week you have to spend an entire day with your child. It's a great idea, but they're feeling like they have to make it up to them. So again, they make it a fun, loving day. And of course, the custodial parent, which in these cases is usually the mother, the kid comes home an hour late after they're supposed to return. They're hyperglycemic. They don't go to sleep. Meanwhile, they have like about 3 hours of homework and studying they haven't done over the weekend, which you try to do for them. They can't fall asleep, and they're sometimes distressed because it's a reminder of its early divorce. It's a reminder of the divorce, and they don't get the kid to sleep till 1 o'clock in the morning. Hasn't done his homework. And again, that parent feels like I'm the bad guy. So trying to convince, I have not been very successful in trying to convince the non-custodial parent. And I'm not talking about evil people. I'm talking about people who really feel, and especially in our community where being a parent is so important, that they're missing out and they want to make it up to them. I try to tell them, the best thing you do to them is be a father, or if it's the mother, be a mother. Break up the fights between the siblings, punish them when they have to be punished, make them do their homework, go over the Gemara, go out and have a catch, do things occasionally, but don't have to be this fun-loving parent. In that respect, by the way, this new arrangement where we're doing equal, and it's catching on. There are a few states that are mandating that, making this the template. But even in courts themselves, and Bezdin, and I sit on a Bezdin occasionally, it's becoming more the norm that it's 1 week, 1 week, 2 weeks, 2 weeks, which when I first heard about it, I thought it was a terrible decision. And I'm seeing it, and it's working. And we have less of this kind of, this schism between the two parents. Now, the problem with that is if the parents are not in the same neighborhood, so the kids, kids have to go to the same school, or if a parent remarries and moves. So it has its flaws as well. But as much as you can to try to prevail upon the non-custodial parent that this is what they should be doing, sometimes the solution is to have more frequent but shorter visits. If, in other words, instead of 1 whole day, have 2 half days. So by having a little more frequency, it feels more like you're a regular parent. It's the old Yogi Berra story of Yogi Berra walks into the pizza shop and orders a pie, and the proprietor says, "You want to cut in 8 pieces or 16?" He said, "Cut 8. I don't think I can eat 16." It feels like more when it's more frequent. And by the way, sometimes, and this goes back to the theme of sometimes you have to just raise the white flag, work it out with the school, that when the kid has that kind of visitation, that the kid can come in late the next day to school, and the teachers look the other way when they don't have their homework or their tests, and that this might, sometimes that's the best you can do under those circumstances.
That's a really interesting note that you just made there. And just to highlight, it was one of the questions that we received was, my ex drops off my son late to school all the time. He doesn't take it seriously, but I am the one who gets calls from the school. How do I get him to understand and take it seriously?
Now, again, if here's an important phenomenon that might help, an important general principle. And I often say to parents, the heart is stronger than the brain. And if you're emotionally invested in something, all the logic in the world is not going to make a difference. And for whatever reason, if this ex-parent is somehow, for emotional reasons, cannot get his act together, or wants the kid to come late to school so he can cherish every minute with the child, or even just to retaliate against you, if they're emotionally invested in getting the kid late to school, you can explain to them till they're blue in the face how bad this is. They're not going to stop. Sometimes it's better to ask the school to do it, and you can make it very clear. I'm not asking you to get embroiled between me and my ex, but this is a school issue. He's coming late, and he's the one delivering him, and I think they'll hear it better from you than from me. So I'm not asking you to do my dirty work, but I think it would be more effective. Could you call him? And by the way, it's important for schools to have relationships with both parents. Very, it should not be just with one parent and assume that parent's sharing with the other one. It's very important for schools to have both to have relationships with both parents, and by the way, to have a copy of the agreement that's relevant to them. That's something else that schools have to learn to do. And as all of you know, divorce agreements are written in very simple English. Then, I have the deed to my house. I have no idea what I own. I have no idea what it says. It could have been Aramaic. I know, I can't understand it. Maybe Aramaic I'd understand better because I went to yeshiva. But the divorce agreements are very readable, very easy to understand. But at any rate, so maybe you can ask the school to step in. Maybe you can try to work it out that you pick the child up and take them to school so that they'd be more prompt. And maybe you just have to, again, say to the school and tell them, I'm trying, I can't. Can we look the other way? Can we just let, because the tension and the conflict or the broiling the kids in the middle will do more harm than good.
Okay, moving along here. Thank you.
Sure.
Another question that I'm just going through kind of like the strands here that are common to
Sure.
multiple questions. To pick the one that's the most concise, how do you deal with a child being fed lies against a good parent, causing them to reject a good parent?
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're gonna make a very important differentiation here, and this I have to make that very clear. We're going to differentiate between parental alienation and having a parent. Now, you might say,
and the question of parental alienation has also come up in the Q&A chat.
So that could be an hour
Right.
presentation, in and of itself. But okay, parental alienation is actual brainwashing. If we have time, I'll explain how that works and what the psychology behind it is. But where a child's reality is actually altered to believe flagrantly untrue things about both parents, but usually it's one parent. Bad mouthing a parent without the brainwashing component is harmful, is not helpful, but nowhere nearly as pernicious and destructive as parental alienation. So in fact, if it's not too extreme and it's from time to time, most children learn how to dismiss it. Most children learn, oh, there goes my parents again, and they kind of brush it off. But if a parent is bad mouthing the other parent and the child brings that home, again, don't turn it into war and don't put the kid in the middle. A very simple comment can be, well, that's, if he quotes his father, or mother, you can say that's his or her opinion. If not, you say, well, that's your opinion. I see it differently. And say how you see it differently, and then don't belabor it, because if you extensively try to argue against the lie, paradoxically, you're reinforcing the lie. Now, in a lot of these questions, and I think I hope I'm not going on a little bit of a tangent, not much of a tangent, a very big difference if you're dealing with a pre-adolescent or an adolescent. And here's the important in terms, and the reason is not just because adolescents are not 80-year-olds in bigger bodies. Adolescents have a different brain. There are parts of their brain that have, first of all, adolescents do have a brain. That might be a chiddush to a lot of people, but but their brain, they're parts of the brain, of the adult brain, that has developed in the adolescent, which is not yet developed in the pre-adolescent. And one of the things an adolescent can do, and this is extremely important, is an adolescent can understand the complexities of a person, the nuances of a person. They can understand that people have many sides to them. Whereas the more elementary school age child sees people in general, and parents also, in a more whole way. The elementary school age child is a world of good guys and bad guys. The adolescent, by the way, this is very relevant to what was going on with this Waldo situation. We're trying to explain it to children. An adolescent can more easily understand how somebody could write such gifted books, could be accused of such heinous crimes. I don't want to go into that subject, but again, it's very similar. So an adolescent can understand the different pieces of one parent or both parents, and that there can be parts of that parent that are endearing and you can respect, and there are parts that you don't, and you can make those kind of differentiations. Very hard to do that for a child. So the adolescent could understand, when it comes to my mother, or when it comes to my father or my mother have this mishigas, but otherwise they're okay. And that's not going to happen with a less likely to happen with a pre-adolescent. So a lot, even when we talk about some of these behaviors, it's important to differentiate between the two. When I'm dealing with, let's say, an adolescent who's struggling with some behaviors on the part of one or both parents that are so mixed, I like to share with them the famous story from the Kotzker Rebbe, in which he actually is brought. He cites from the story during the Haggadah of the four sons, and he talks about a king who sent his son around the world. And when his son came back, he said, "What did you see?" He said, "Well, I saw this brilliant genius." I said, "What did I say?" "I saw this very simple guy, not too smart." "Well, I saw this very kind, righteous person." "Well, I saw this very mean-spirited person." And the king said, "Why did I have to send you around the world? We have people like that in our kingdom." And the son said, "You don't understand, he's one person." So his point is the four sons are the four different sides of ourselves, but that's something. So it's a very different ballgame in these kind of things with adolescents than with younger children. Okay, I'm sorry, I probably too lengthy.
Yeah, no, and maybe to bring it to like more specificity, a question came in that is a little bit more specific, and I'll just read it to you. Similar to the currently discussed question, I'm a custodial father. Non-custodial mother keeps telling our 6-year-old child that I'm making bad choices. Wrong kind of car seat, wrong medical choices, bad school selection, and more, despite the experts and social workers telling me the opposite. What can be done when the child brings this back to me?
Okay, so probably a 6-year-old is more parroting than really believes it. And I think what I would do, when you're doing this wrong, do this, doing this wrong. The one thing I'm doing right, I'm going to give you a big kiss. One thing we'll do right is if you do your homework today, I'm going to take you for ice cream, and just put it aside and don't get into it. And that usually will be sufficient for a child that young. The child is maybe pressured to bring that, or hears a lot of it, so wants to see how you respond. But again, that's the same paradox I mentioned before. If you sit down with that kid and give him a 2-hour argument why everything the other one's saying is wrong, you've just reinforced everything the other person said. And usually that more carefree kind of dismissive response would be more important. Ideally, again, the outlook should be, I'm going to do in my house my thing, she's going to do in her house her thing. It doesn't have to be identical. We're two different homes. And that's the nature of raising children post-divorce.
Okay, so moving along, another question that came in. My ex was abusive to me when we were married. I'm very concerned that when my kids are with him, they are learning awful behaviors. He is very quick to anger and is capable of some scary outbursts. I don't believe he would ever hurt the kids the way he hurt me, but his aggression and rage still comes out. How do I protect them from this when I am not there to help?
Okay, well, if that would be a problem if you're married, because the same behavior would be coming out. And in fact, in some respects, it would be worse because they would see firsthand the aggressive behavior against the spouse. So in a way, in a situation like that, if there's an abusive spouse who is either verbally or physically abusing, but not abusing the children, but which does happen, but abusing the marital partner, you're getting divorced was probably a big step in preventing their witnessing this or modeling for them. That's not a situation you stay in. So that's half the battle. And again, I'm going to tell you what I've said in a lot of other things: model the alternative behavior. You have to be doubly cognizant. I mean, that's part of the challenge of, how do you get angry at your child? If this is what the father's doing, how do you discipline? And we all have to be careful about that. But when in a situation like this, you have to show how you show disapproval. I remember someone once called me, and he was about to give a speech about kids of the derech, and he said, he was wanted to prepare, and he said, and the rule of thumb is unconditional love, right? And I said, yeah, but not unconditional approval. We love our kids, but we don't have to approve. So that skill to disapprove in the context of love is going to be doubly important when you have this backdrop. And yes, if the child's parent, whether you're married or you're divorced, if the child's parent has a problem with aggression and anger or is abusive, there's a distinct possibility, despite your very best efforts, that this will be modeled, and not only modeled, where a lot of these things have a genetic component too. And that may be part of their background. Now, if the child does start displaying behaviors like this, and I would probably say it'll be a little hard in a pre-adolescent, unless you may try, but for an adolescent, you can start introducing the idea that there are two different ways to handle things. And this is how I handled this, how your father handles. You're going to have to make a choice which way you want to go about doing this. So you're not saying he's wrong, I'm right, but you're introducing to them or to the child that this is a style, this is a type, not the only way to be. And there are alternatives. So if the child, maybe even if he has this tendency, catches it in himself. And by the way, there are a lot of people out there who've been raised in abusive situations who have learned to recognize the repetition of that behavior themselves, catch it, and prevent it from coming to actualization. So that may be what you can accomplish.
One of the, I guess, major themes that I'm hearing come through, like through a lot of the answers that you're giving, is this notion, this idea of really focusing a lot on your home and on yourself and less so on your ex. That seems to be a common thread here. And I'm just imagining being in that position, that it has to be, going back to what we started with, the superhuman Herculean effort,
Yes.
Speaking on the emotional level. And I guess to kind of shift gears a little bit, something that I've found in speaking with single parents over the years that is just really, really important, and I'd love to hear you speak about it a little bit. I find that single parents are maybe the best in the world at helping their children, and they're maybe the worst in the world at helping themselves and tending to their own needs.
Yes.
They're so hyper-focused, to their credit, on their family, on their children, and it seems like they just don't have time for themselves. And I know, and it's so important. Self-care is just such an important thing, and it's so hard to be able to do what you need to do for your family when you are not doing well. So can you speak a little bit to that idea, the importance of
Sure.
it, ideas?
Oh, it's important, and it's also important you want to remarry. And it's hard to remarry when you feel demoralized and like a schmata. You have to feel good about yourself. And again, that's our next webinar is remarriage. But it can be a very healing and exhilarating denouement to this saga. But it is extremely important. And you know what? I think this speaks to also, excuse me, one of the hardest things for anyone to do when they're in a crisis situation, whether the crisis is divorce, whether the crisis is death, whether the crisis is illness, is how do you become a taker? How do you become, instead of the benefactor, the beneficiary? We all pride ourselves. We all want to see ourselves as the ones who give to everybody else. We're the wealthy people are giving charity. We're the mental health professionals helping others. Guess what? Sometimes the wealthy person, sometimes the mental health professional needs help from others. One of my favorite midrashim is when Eliezer is trying to find the shidduch for Yitzchak. It says, "Vaseh chesed im Adoni Abraham." Please do chesed to my master Abraham. And the Medrash says everybody needs chesed, even Abraham, who brought chesed into the world. He needs chesed. So sometimes you have to be a recipient. And one of the many heroes in this saga of divorced homes, etc., are the grandparents, the aunts, the uncles, the friends, the community, the rabbi, all of these people, my extended family, and all the other organizations that address the needs of people in these situations. Get the help. It's huge. It's a very big undertaking. Take the financial help, take the help in terms of babysitting and participating. But by the way, another very important theme, and again, this sometimes is misunderstood. Let's say the part of the help is, let me give an example. Let's say grandparents. And again, today we have very young grandparents. Not I'm a grandparent, I like to mention that. But, we have young grandparents who can assume a parental-like role. But your grandma and grandpa pinch hitting, you're never the parent. That's very important that you stay in your role. But take the help. Take the assistance, and also, by the way, sometimes as and I think you alluded to this, Rabbi, that you're so busy doing this again, this superheroic kind of work in terms of parenting alone, parenting upstream against some of the complications that are created by an ex-spouse, that you feel like you look at yourself as this workhorse or as a slave, something like that, and not somebody who can be self-indulgent. And you can be, and you can treat yourself to vacations, treat yourself to nice clothing if you, to the extent that you can afford it. Treat yourself to, if there's a visitation, to a day where you just stay in your pajamas and relax. You don't have to. Part of what happens to us is that sometimes circumstances dictate how we define ourselves, and our self-definitions will dictate our behavior. And again, I think what we're communicating here, both of us together in unison, is that you're not this nebuch, you're not this lo yutzlach, whatever it is, you're not this stigmatized marginal member of society. You're doing incredible work, and you're as deserving as for in the indulgences that we all have as much as anyone else.
Yeah, and I, piggybacking off of what you're saying, I think it's such an important thing for single parents, for all of us, but single parents in particular, who are so hyper focused so often on their children, just to remember to take care of yourself and to do things for yourself. And I think of the ideas of self-care, and I think that there's almost like two different categories, and oftentimes people think of self-care as, I don't know, vegging out, just laying on the bed with like Netflix or whatever it might be, right? And there's a time and a place for that. I think though at the same time it's important to also do things that bring you joy, like get out and do things that really make you happy, not just things that you shut off, which we all need to shut off sometimes and just have that like reprieve. But we all have things that we enjoy and that bring us joy, and find joy in life. That self-care, I feel, is just such an important sort of fueling station to be able to do that superhuman job. And as we're winding down here, there's a question that popped up that I feel like is almost just brings the whole thing together here. How can one parent do it all alone? Own parents, something just popped up there. Own parents are unavailable, no siblings, and few friends. How can one person do it all alone? And I feel like this is what we're talking about. And
right.
Taking care of yourself, recognizing, this almost pulls it all together, right? Recognizing what's within your power, what's not within your power, being realistic about what you can expect of yourself and of your children. What would you say in response to this question, which is it's painful to read, right? There are people who feel all alone, and I just want to say, if you feel all alone, please reach out to my extended family. We're very serious when we say that we try to be an extended family. If you feel that your own parents are unavailable and you have no siblings and few friends, we're going to try to be your siblings and your friends and your parents. We're going to try to do that as much as we possibly can. So please reach out to us. I put us in the chat, the email that you can reach out to, or our website. But Doctor, how would you respond to this?
I'll throw in a commercial also. Therapy is indicated. Ohel has two low cost or sliding scales clinics in Far Rockaway and Flatbush. That's also an option. Again, certainly if money is a consideration. What comes to my mind, and I tend to think in metaphors, so you'll bear with me. My therapy is hiking. I try to go at least once a month. I have a bunch of old guys my age. I have a fake organization I call AIC, stands for Athletic Country Hiking Expedition. We go to the woods and we spend a day in the woods. And from time to time, I've gone on hikes. And if you do a climbing and you get to the top of the mountain, and you can actually look down to where your car was parked. And you can see how your car looks like a little matchbox. And you can say, wow, I did that. And it's a very fulfilling experience. But it's an interesting phenomenon while you're doing it, while you're taking on what we call the Herculean task, while you're climbing that mountain, you don't realize how much you're doing while you're doing it until you get to the top. And I'm going to assure many of the parents who wrote this, by the way, please take advantage of the resources. We live in a very generous community. There's much to be given and be takers when you need it. But, you're going to someday, when you're walking your last child down the aisle to the chuppah, you're going to look back at what you did and you're going to be blown away. I did that. And that's what you're in store for. So many people have a lot of cards stacked against them. And usually what that does is, instead of defeating the person, it forces them to build up their muscles and do all the more. And I can tell you, in fact, one of the exhilarating aspects of doing the kind of work that I do, and with difficult situations like divorce, parental alienation, trauma, loss, is I don't just see the tragedy, I see the strength and the unity. And it's there for the taking. So that's my response. Huh?
That's beautiful. And maybe in closing, I'll just read a message that popped up here that I think is great. And that is from one of our participants. Single parents need self-compassion and self-care. I think also the single parents need to be viewed as a valued, respected asset to the community for all they are shouldering. And I say amen. From all of my experience, amen to that.
Right.
I've only had the most wonderful experiences just watching this Herculean effort unfolding in front of me all these years, working with this amazing group of people called single parents. Doctor, are there any parting words you'd like to share? Anything you'd like to tend to before we say goodnight to our wonderful participants here?
Well, look, I guess what I'll share one more story and then we'll conclude with that. I often talk about when I was in YU, I had the special schus to be in the Shir of Aaron Kreiser, who was really one of the giants of that time, from Amir in China. And most of the guys in YU at that time were becoming doctors and lawyers. That was the thing to do. And I was a senior and I had 1.5 feet out the door. I was ready, and he was giving me some well-deserved rebuke, Musser. And at one point he said to me, "You're going to medical school, right?" And I said, "No." "You're going to law school?" He said, "No." So what are you doing? I said, "I'm in psychology." He said, "Psychology?" He took me out, he put me in the hallway, he put his finger in my mouth, in front of my face. And he said, "Blumenthal, you want to be a psychologist, you got to be a goon, you got to be a genius. Because a doctor, a lung is a lung, but every person who comes into your office is," he said, "a partial bifnei atzma, is his own person." And then he said to me, "So study hard, listen to professors, read the books, not an easy profession." I often say that was over 40 years ago. And every time someone walks into my office, I see Rabbi Kreiser in front of me. And I say to myself, it doesn't matter how long you're doing this, you're starting from scratch. Everybody's divorce is unique. Everybody's children are unique. Everybody's extended family is unique. Everybody themselves are unique. Any generalities, and sometimes that's the problem with presentations like this. We can talk in generalities, but sometimes it doesn't quite fit. It doesn't quite, You know yourself, you know your children, you know your ex. Some of this may be helpful. Some of this may be needed to tailor to some of the situations. Some of this may not be relevant to you. So use that grain of salt, that sifter, and hopefully a lot of things that were said will be useful. And I can speak for myself and Rabbi Drandoff, for both resources that people should take advantage of to the extent, or myself and to Ohel and my extended team. And we love working together with everybody else. So use us, and we're happy to partner with you in this huge effort.
Amazing. Thank you so much for those words. That's really an amazing close to tonight. And I appreciate everybody being here. I want to just let everybody know to expect an email with a very short survey that we'd appreciate if you would take a few minutes to fill out. It'll really help us kind of figure out the best content that you're interested in for potential future events. And with that, I say good night and thank you so much for joining us. Be well.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor.
Bye.